Bit much, no? Although, to be fair, Mark's been waiting 4 years to do something like that, so I thought we'd give him the opportunity. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the John Mackintosh Hall Theatre for GibTalks 2019. It is, as always, an absolute pleasure to see so many of you here already this early in the morning, and we look forward to welcoming what, for the third year running, is a sellout crowd over the course of the day. Now, as you can see, today we are very much in a celebratory mood because in the summer of 2014, I approached Gibraltar Cultural Services with an idea. Today, that idea celebrates its 5th edition. And to be honest, thank you. To be honest, I do not think there were many of us sitting around that table on that day who would have predicted that GibTalks would go on to become what a Facebook commentator recently called one of the best events of the year. Since January of 2015, we have made the walls of this theatre ring with the sound of Gibraltar talking. And by the end of these next 7 hours, with, as always, an hour's break for lunch, GibTalks would have played host to no fewer than 86 different individuals who have all stood on this stage and shared their stories with us. That amounts to over 20 hours of continuous talking. And in that time, we have heard from 2 Knights of the Realm, 3 Chief Ministers, 12 Members of Parliament, 6 PhDs, a British Olympian, and a former Miss World, as well as from a wide range of artists, writers, journalists, musicians, activists, athletes, and many, many more. Our speakers have ranged from the age of 89 all the way through to 17, and have included members of our Jewish, Indian, Muslim, Eastern European, and LGBTQ communities, as well as people with mental health issues and physical disabilities. Our speakers have spoken about a wide range of subjects, including dragon trees, conscription, social mobility, happiness, basketball, immigration, post-traumatic stress disorder, the key to a happy marriage, the Janito language, and even bicycles. Their voices have been heard live in this theatre, then broadcast to the whole community on GBC, and are now available online on our dedicated YouTube channel for the whole world to access. This channel brings together video recordings of all the talks from past editions of GibTalks and has already attracted thousands of views, including from places as far afield as Canada and Australia. GibTalks has also given birth to some amazing adventures, such as, for example, former speakers Mark Randall and Stephen Hermida earlier this year embarking on an arduous trek through the Himalayas, an adventure conceived right here backstage in GibTalks 2018. The voices of GibTalks are spreading far and wide, thereby cementing the legacy of our young event. So given this legacy, it is important that we bring you a program that will help to augment it. So today, we'll be hearing from a politician with a huge responsibility as he works towards navigating Gibraltar through the Brexit process. From a former minister who has returned to frontline politics to try to inject new life into his party. From an endurance swimmer who, among his many other achievements, swam across the Straits of Gibraltar, touched the coast of Africa, and then swam back again. From a young man with an inspiring story about his journey through drug recovery. From one of Gibraltar's leading actresses. From a local author and journalist with a motivating message about how to approach age itself. From a radio presenter who has fallen in love with our community. From a retired head teacher with a painful but stirring story about an ordeal he faced as a parent. From a historian with vivid memories about how our Gibraltar has evolved. From a young chess prodigy and fencing champion whose promising career has faced a serious threat. And of course, we shall also be hearing from our Vox Pop speakers, who this year will be speaking to us about issues such as the Montessori system, dyslexia, escaping challenging realities, and dealing with a cancer diagnosis. And in an innovation to the event, GibTalks will this year be contributing to the abortion debate that has gripped our community, with representatives from each side of the argument given this platform to make their case in an attempt to keep that debate going. Once again, GibTalks offers you a varied and exciting program that will resonate through our community and get Gibraltar talking. This year, we're also introducing a number of innovations. We have listened to audience feedback, and we have included a break halfway through each session to give you longer and better opportunities for comfort breaks and refreshments, and we ask you to consult your program for more information. Today, we also have a dedicated social media officer on site who will be interacting with our speakers and with yourselves in order to maximize our online presence and give an insight into the complete GibTalks experience with photos and videos. And we invite you to join the online conversation by tagging all your posts with #GibTalks. But apart from that, the event follows its familiar and successful format. Our speakers have been given a stage, a microphone, and 15 or 10 minutes, and your ticket gives you access to the whole event. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, now that we're looking back at these last 5 editions of GibTalks, it is our responsibility to think about the next 5, and maybe even beyond that. People often ask me if I worry that eventually we will run out of potential speakers. But my answer to that is no, because I genuinely feel that each and every single Gibraltarian has an amazing story to tell. And I would like to encourage all of you here present, or watching on GBC, or on YouTube, who may feel that you, or someone you know, would like to share one of these amazing stories, to please get in touch with us. Our front of house staff has nomination forms that you can fill in, or you can contact us via email, Facebook, Twitter, or just face-to-face, and help us piece together the GibTalks events for the future. But for now, just make yourselves comfortable and lend us your ears, because today, for the 5th time, GibTalks. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. The story I have for you today happened about, in fact, exactly 30 years ago this May. I remember it as if it happened yesterday. The dreaded telephone call when our teenage children are growing up and are out late materialized and became a reality on the night of the 20th of May of 1989. The telephone call was going to herald the beginning of the most harrowing and horrendous experience that both my wife and I and the rest of the family had to go through 30 years ago. Mark, our son, had been revising for his exam, which he was going to take on the following Wednesday. This was a Saturday. He had spent the whole day indoors, immersed in his books. In the evening, his friend Richard, who was now working at Barclays Bank and the proud owner of a brand new Peugeot 205 bright red car, came for him and invited him to go along into Spain. At first, Mark resisted. But I suppose, having spent the whole day with the books, and the lure of spending some time with friends up the coast was too great, and in the end he relented. I remember the conversation that he had with Richard, and it left me a little bit uneasy, because at first he didn't want to go, but he gave in. Richard, I'm pleased to say, is with us today. He's here in the front seat. If you lift your hand, Richard, people can see where you are. I'm delighted that he's here with us now. They set off for Spain, and when it was time for bed, my wife and I retired, and we slept. And we received the dreaded telephone call in the middle of the night. The caller informed us that Mark had been involved in a particularly serious accident along the coast road. This was the old road. I'm talking about 1989, when the dual carriageway still had not been constructed. We were to make our way down to the police post, where we would be informed about details of where Mark was and what we should do. Like a flash, we dressed, sped down to Four Corners, and went to the British police post. There, Richard's family were, not his parents. His parents were in Camping Tugera, further up the coast that weekend. But his grandmother and sister were there. Along came a Spanish Guardia Civil with the two passports. And he came, and matter of fact, he said, this one has been sent to Cadiz, that was Richard, and this one here has been sent to Carlos Ayas Hospital in Malaga. Very quickly, we made our way back home. We collected the few pesetas we had there, the necessary documentation. We collected our teenage daughter, who was up then. And before we left, I made several telephone calls, one of which was to my brother-in-law, the doctor, who had a practice in Nueva Andalucía and lived on the Malaga side of Estepona. I told him what I knew, and being a doctor, I asked him to find out whatever he could. We made our way. We didn't have mobile phones in those days, and of course, the vehicles didn't have airbags either. As we rounded one of the bends near Sotogrande, this was the monument that caught our eye. My wife screamed. My daughter announced that she was feeling sick, and I could barely keep my foot on the accelerator pedal. We judged for a while, and I was tempted to stop and look at the car. But I wanted to get to my brother-in-law in Estepona as quickly as possible and find out what the position was. We arrived there to find my sister crying, and my brother-in-law very seriously telling me that he had been in touch with the hospital, and they said that Mark was in a serious condition, but fortunately he was alive. He saw the state that we were in, and he said, "You're not driving, I'm driving there." I was so glad, because being a doctor, he knew the medical protocol in Spain, which I ignored completely, never having dealt with Spain medically. And we made our way there. We arrived at Urgencias after what seemed an eternity. All the way he was reassuring us that the hospital had an excellent record of traumatología, which is where Mark was going to end. He made his way into the unit, came out immediately, and did the thumbs up, and told us that Mark was okay, and we were allowed to go in. The picture was not a pretty picture at all. Mark was lying on the bed with his leg outstretched. He was in traction. He had broken the femur, the longest and strongest bone of our body, and he had a hairline fracture of the pelvis. His arm was also immobilized. Some of the small bones of the wrist had also been misplaced, and he wasn't allowed to move that. His head was bejeweled with, looked like diamonds, obviously pieces of glass on his head. And his body was completely covered in lacerations, a lot of which had already been sutured. Mark was awake, which was a good sign. He was falling to sleep and awake. And when his mother asked him, "Do you know who we are?" "Of course," he said, "Mum, of course I know who you are." That to us was a good sign. We were to spend a number of weeks in that hospital. Luckily, we found a place across the hospital, which was known as La Casa de Enfrente, and it was going to be our home for the next week or so. The neurosurgeon couldn't decide whether the bump on the head that he had received had caused any internal damage. And I noticed that his eye was sticking out, practically out of the socket. When I looked closely, the pupil was totally dilated, and that pupil was going to remain dilated for many, many months afterwards. Eventually, the neurosurgeon said, "Yes, okay, we can go ahead with the rest of the surgery." And about 3 or 4 days after being in that intensive care unit where we saw horror pictures there of other families in the same plight as we were. On the advice of my brother-in-law, we moved him to a private clinic because I had an insurance, a family insurance. And he said that that was the done thing in Spain. And the reason that we moved him there was not because he was going to have better medical treatment there, but simply because he would be having a room of his own with 2 beds, one for himself and one for the acompañante, which was going to be my wife. I came over to Gibraltar, paid a visit to the bank. Obviously, we needed cash. In those days, we didn't have cards, debit or credit cards, and inform the family, and also try and find out how Richard was doing in Cadiz. Richard was still in a coma, and Richard was going to remain in a coma for many, many weeks, if not months after that. Mark was operated, everything went well, and after a couple of weeks, he was sent back to Gib. We went to the Royal Naval Hospital because at the time I was working here for the Ministry of Defence. And I was tasked with translating the medical report that came from Spain. I had to resort to my knowledge of physiology and anatomy and to my grammar school knowledge of Latin to be able to decipher that. It was a tremendous task for me. He didn't stay long at that hospital. It was more cosmetic than anything else. He was discharged from there as well. And the first thing he wanted to do was to visit Richard in Cadiz. So having spent time in the big Carlos Sajas hospital, then in the clinic, then in the Royal Naval Hospital here, we spent quite a bit of time seeing Richard. Mark would sit there by his side, talk to him, crack jokes, played the sort of music that they enjoyed together. And we did this for many, many days. At first, because it was term time, we had to do it over the weekends. The picture that Richard presented was an even uglier one than the one that Mark had presented. Richard had his eyes completely open, but unseeing. He was attached to all sorts of instruments and machines, and Richard was not responding at all. And this was after about 3 or 4 weeks after the accident. Richard was to remain in that state for many, many weeks, as I said before. I noticed that his muscles were beginning to atrophy, and his legs and arms were acquiring a funny shape. His chest seemed to be well up here, and he was having great problems breathing and making very, very funny noises. But there was absolutely no response from him, despite the fact that a team of nurses would come regularly to move his limbs, move his joints, and get him going. I see time is running out. Richard wanted me to say today that he'll remain eternally grateful to his parents who are no longer with us now. And he's sure that when he came to, it was mainly his parents that really supported him and gave him the sort of life he was able to come back after so many months to the land of the living. This took, as I said, a number of months. When Julian asked me for a title for this talk, I thought of a parent's dilemma or a parent's, I can't remember what I told you now, but I think perhaps a parent's nightmare, I think, would have been more correct to have used there. And if I considered my experience a nightmare, I could only just imagine what Richard's parents must have felt like, having spent there all those months, seeing Richard deteriorating fast, and not seeing the daily progress that we saw with Mark. We gave a talk to something like this, only much more elaborate, to many school children, with a tack of health and safety in it, warning children that riding a bike or driving a car is really using a killing vehicle, the potential of a killing vehicle. It's an experience that I think will always be there. We talk about it now, and we have many, many anecdotes, things that made us laugh afterwards, things that we saw whilst in the hospital, things that we heard, and other experiences. But that obviously will have to be the content of yet another talk, because I see I've got only 41 seconds left now for the end of my talk now. Thank you very much for listening to this now, and I wish you a good day. Thank you.
Hello everyone. It's funny that I've called my speech Addicted to Escaping Reality, because I'm so scared and nervous right now, I could literally run away. So let me start before I actually do. Okay, so my name is Stephen and I'm an addict. Usually the first thing that people think about when I mention addiction is everything related to drugs, alcohol, gambling, or whatever the addiction may be. Yes, it's true that all this is a big part of addiction, but addiction is much more than that. And if drugs and alcohol were my only problem, life would be much easier and I definitely wouldn't be standing here today. So I'm here today to share my journey through addiction and recovery. Let me take you back to when it all started for me. Before drugs were even in the picture, I was a shy, scared and insecure kid when I began first school. As a kid, I already felt different to everyone and I hated this feeling. I hated it so much that I could not face going to school, knowing I was not intelligent enough, sporty enough, or enough on anything really to fit in. This is where I believe my addiction started to control me. I was unable to deal with or identify what I was feeling. I was scared to share my feelings. So this is where I already began to escape my reality, by trying to run away from school in the mornings. I did this a few times, but eventually I stopped. As I was such a scared kid, I would be terrified when I was hiding. So I came up with a different way of escaping my reality. Every time I felt scared, insecure, or any other feeling that I couldn't identify, I eventually, I get a bit nervous my first time, and it's my biggest fear, so hopefully by the end of the day I've conquered it. I could not cope. I would make a circle shape with my arms. I disappeared from the world every time I did this. Eventually, this method was not good enough, as people, including my teachers, would make fun of me. And when I lifted my head up, the world suddenly reappeared. I saw them all laughing and pointing at me. The problem became worse. I accepted that no one would ever understand me. That's when I turned from a fearful kid into an angry kid in order to protect myself. Every time I felt scared or insecure, I would throw a tantrum and go crazy. I would throw chairs around, and I became a very violent kid. For a while, I earned some respect from people, but eventually everyone started laughing at me again. I was such an angry kid that the whole school invented a chant about me, which went a bit like this. Ea, 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 Steven se cabrea. Ea, 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 Steven se cabrea. Y ahí va Steven como los locos, intentando coger a alguien para pegar. So eventually I became a joke. I even tried bullying at one point, as I felt bullied by other kids and teachers. However, I am way too sensitive and compassionate to have been a bully. This was just not part of who I am. For example, the other day I went to see a film with my nephew, the new Winnie the Pooh, and I ended up crying in the cinema. So imagine how much I would cry when I got home and prayed for someone to help me. I did not want to hurt anyone. I just wanted my pain to go away. It seemed no matter how hard I tried, there was no way of escaping my reality. This was until I was introduced to drugs at the age of 13. I was always so angry that one day one of the older kids in my patio said, "Chiquillo, fumate un porro y ya quédate a gusto." So that's exactly what I did. And that's where my addiction took advantage of my inability of coping with my feelings. And my addiction to drugs commenced. As I took the first puff of a joint, I felt this warmth fill my body, and all my fears, all my insecurities, all my pain just left. I smoked so much that day that I threw up, but I did not see the consequences of smoking. I only saw that this would numb me completely. So I was instantly hooked. But like everything else I tried before, this too eventually stopped working, as I quickly grew a tolerance to it. So I had no option but to start using heavier drugs, like alcohol and pills, which eventually grew to smoking cocaine and sniffing heroin. I was always trying different drugs, and for a while they all worked. But eventually all my fears, pain, and insecurities would all come back, and it would come back even stronger. So the quantity of drugs would increase. I was always chasing the high that would completely numb me. It got so bad that in order to maintain my drug consumption, I had to steal from my parents, friends, even my youngest brother. But it got to a stage where nothing worked. Nothing would help me numb away the feeling of not belonging in this world. This led to a moment of desperation, as I was losing it all. I lost my house, I lost all my money, I was probably about to lose my family too, and worst of all, I completely lost myself. I was a living dead man. I decided to ask for help, but before I did, I took all the drugs in my house. I took so many pills in the hope that I would never wake up again and see the embarrassment in my family's faces. But somehow, I woke up completely fine, with just a big pain on my side. I saw this as a sign that I was destined for more than just getting high. So I asked for help, and what was the worst day of my life became the best day of the rest of my life. This brings me to my journey of recovery. Let me tell you now, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. It's been so hard that more than once I thought of going back to the insanity of active addiction, as it's easier to live in a fantasy world than live in my reality. When I first started my 12-step program to recovery, I was 25. I thought that this is easy, as the first step was admitting I was powerless over my addiction and that my life had become unmanageable. I knew this since the age of 18, so it should be a piece of cake, right? Well, as I started to do the rest of the steps, I had to dig deep into my problems, my insecurities, and all the stuff I had done in active addiction. I wanted to drop dead there and then, and go back to smoking crack. But I stuck to it as I wanted to change so badly. I wanted to become the person I knew I could become, and slowly it started to get easier. I had a few hiccups where I did not relapse, but I became very sad and depressed. I even thought about my own death, and that I should just finish it in order to end the pain. It got to a point in my recovery that I had to deal with something I had been ignoring for many years. This was the passing of my grandmother. That's all the things I did, from street fights to stealing to smuggling, nothing could compare to the pain of feeling like I had let her down. Many years ago, my grandmother was diagnosed with terminal cancer at the very young age of 59. And my whole family gave her a GBC open day surprise. I chose to let my fear stop me from seeing this great woman who was always by my side and always made me feel like it was okay. It was easier to ignore my problem. It was easier to ignore the real problem. I couldn't accept that my grandmother was dying, so I pretended like everything was okay. I couldn't bring myself to visit her during her illness, and this haunted me my entire youth, years, and adulthood. She sadly passed away at the age of 60. In recovery, I was forced to deal with this issue in order to move on, but the pain was so raw, so real, that I knew no amount of drugs could take the pain away. So I wanted to die, as death takes the ultimate pain away. This is how addiction gets to us. Addiction is an incurable disease, and its goal is not to get us hooked on drugs or alcohol or whatever the addiction may be. Its goal is to kill us through it. I have been fortunate in recovery, as I have a great family who support me. I have lots of good friends who are also addicts in recovery and show me how to cope with reality. I found a sport in which I invest a lot of time and effort. This sport is running. Running makes me challenge myself and also gives me a healthy way of escaping my reality when I need a break from my mind and my addiction. I met a friend in running who gave me the freedom to share my pain with her and always listen to me without judgment. However, not all recovering addicts have the same luck as me, as they try and make the changes but come across a lot of stigma and judgment that's add to the problems. In the end, they give up on recovery. I too come across and still come across this stigma on a daily basis, and it's very hurtful and saddening when you have to hide who you are in order to not be judged and be accepted. This is why I speak up and share my journey. My aim is to try and show people that if you are hard on us, but also give us a chance when we try and make the change, we can become great, loving people who will always go out the way to help others. This is why, at the beginning of next year, I will be leaving to South Africa as a volunteer worker to help the more unfortunate people and experience a different way of living, a different culture, and to open my eyes a bit more. So remember, next time you meet an addict who is trying to make the change, pat them on the back and support them, take an interest in them, make them feel it's okay to be a recovering addict and not hide it away. We are humans just like you and did not ask for this illness. Please don't close doors on us, as we already have addiction trying to kick our ass on a daily basis. And for my fellow addicts, active or in recovery, remember there is a life after drugs, and it's a beautiful one. Trust me. I also thought there was no way I could move on without numbing my pain. I was at an all-time low, and 3 days before I hit rock bottom, I found myself sitting down in Casement's tunnel with a hood over my head, begging for money so I wouldn't lose my house. A day later, I got paid a big sum of money for an illegal job I did, and instead of using this to change my life and start fresh, I spent it all on drugs, as I could not see a way out. But with help and support, there is one. First, we must deal with our deepest pain, and we get worse before it gets better. But it gets better. And it's the best feeling in the world, Life is beautiful, people. Let's enjoy it and love each other. No matter where you come from or what you have wrongfully done in the past, let's help one another grow and improve for a brighter future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen Walker.
Hi everyone, I want to start off by asking you all a question. So if I can see your hands, please put up your hands, I'll call upon you. Are you up for it? Yeah? Okay. Can you name one of the cleverest people to have ever lived? Anyone? Einstein. Yes, Einstein is often given... Sorry, just a second, technical difficulty. Einstein is often given that title of one of the cleverest people to have ever lived. You know what his teachers said about him? Change the next one. Yeah, thanks. That he would never be able to do anything that would ever make any sense in life. You believe that of Einstein, yeah? Einstein also said, I would feel under such strain that I felt, rather than going to a test, that instead I was walking to the guillotine. Teachers also thought that he asked too many questions and that he found learning difficult. What about Steve Jobs? Was he clever? Yes. Some may even say he was a genius. So was Einstein disadvantaged? Or Steve Jobs, was he disadvantaged? Well, both of them were dyslexic. How does our society measure intelligence? What makes someone clever? What would the world look like if intelligence was not judged by how well we read, write, or spell? Is dyslexia really a disability or a disadvantage? Let's look at the word itself. The word dyslexia is a funny word to describe the way our brain works. Yes, I use the right side of my brain more, and I have struggled with reading, writing, and spelling. I am dyslexic. Would you have guessed it? No, probably not. As being dyslexic does not mean that I have a visually obvious physical disability. Some may even say it's not a disability at all, but just a different way of learning or thinking. Anyway, let's go back to the word. Dyslexia. Dys means difficulty or difficult, and lexia means words. So it's difficulty with words or language. Now, this may be the case for many dyslexic people, but it's just the scratch. It just scratches the surface of what a dyslexic person is like. It is also a very negative way to look at someone and just looking at their struggles with reading, writing, and spelling. We should change the name to something that highlights their strengths and their gifts. We have very good spatial awareness and highly aware of our surroundings. We are more curious than average. We think mainly in pictures instead of words. We are highly intuitive and insightful, and we can experience thought as reality. We have very vivid imaginations. All these traits make us very creative and very good problem solvers. So why do we struggle at school, I hear you ask? Well, just close your eyes a moment with me. Just think back. A long time ago, generation upon generation, parents would teach their children the important things they needed to know. How would they do it? Yes, by showing them. They would do it hands-on style. Was there reading and writing involved? Probably not. Would have this been a problem for a dyslexic person? Not at all. It would have been the best way to teach. So why did we change it? something that worked fine. Why did we change it? I'll tell you why. Because about 600 years ago, in the 1400s, the printing press was invented. The world would change. The way we taught changed completely. And by the 1600s, schools were using the printed word to pass on information. How many of you here in this auditorium did apprenticeships back in the day? I can't see you, but hopefully a few. How many of you think apprenticeships should be more accessible nowadays? Yeah, many people come out of school without the necessary qualifications to get a job. Are all these people stupid or incapable of getting a job? I would bet that with the right support and teaching, they could. For example, some of these kinds of people could probably fix your car, take an engine apart and put it back together, but not be able to read a book on the subject. Maybe you have someone who could cook or create an amazing meal or dish, but struggle to write down exactly what they've created in their imagination. Or a plumber who's come in and installed, all the plumbing problems, solved all the plumbing problems that you thought weren't impossible, but can't read the instruction manual of the boiler they've just installed. Put these kinds of people in a room and ask them to write about what they do, about their jobs. They may panic. Ask them to do an exam on them. They would freeze. Ask them to show someone. Ask them to talk through it with someone, and they will light up, come out their shells and shine. Some may be dyslexic and suffer with low self-esteem, even think that they are stupid. That is why I explain, just because someone may struggle with reading, writing, and spelling does not mean they cannot succeed in life, or indeed in the workplace. Often recognizing and understanding dyslexia is the first step to overcoming your difficulties. As a chairperson of the Gibraltar Dyslexia Support Group, I get a lot of calls from parents. I remind them that dyslexia often runs in families. And even though it may not be obvious to the untrained eye, our parents or our grandparents may have been unrecognized dyslexics. In my family, it's rife. Maybe more than the average, 10%. Yes, 10% is the average. But I'm sure in my family, it's more like 40%. I think more of my cousins, my uncles and aunties are dyslexics than aren't. But maybe that's just me. Many entrepreneurs blossom later on in life. A great deal of self-made millionaires are dyslexic. Many of them don't even have a fancy degree. Some were school dropouts. Maybe you are thinking about someone right now that may be dyslexic. Maybe it's a family member. Maybe it's you. Remember that the stats show that in this auditorium there should be at least 30 dyslexic people with varying degrees of dyslexia. So let's look at the likes of Einstein and Jobs as role models. For what people might have struggled at school to do, let's remember that reading is not the only way to learn, and in the grand scheme of things, in the world's history is fairly recent. Let's change the way we look at people who struggle with reading, writing, and spelling. Let's not look down on them. Who knows, they may be the next Tesla, Steven Spielberg, Agatha Christie, or Walt Disney. Thank you.